If you've been following the news lately, there's a good chance you've come across at least one article talking about so-called assisted dying. Unsurprisingly, like many other health-related issues of the day, this topic has become rather divisive. However, unlike previous public debates on medical issues such as whether or not vaccinations cause autism, there's really no definitive answer as to whether assisted dying is right or wrong. Which side of the fence you land on ultimately depends on your individual opinions and beliefs. Obviously, the best way to make an informed decision on such an important matter is to first arm yourself with as much factual information as possible, and this is what we hope to provide you with in today's video. We'll discuss exactly what assisted dying is, the different opinions on allowing it, and various arguments for and against. Let's start off with a quote. "When you read this, I will be dead. Not because I have suffered a tragic accident or died from a long-standing or painful disease. No, it will be because I have made a conscious and deliberate effort to end my own life." These are the words of Noel Conway, who took his own life in June 2021. He went on to say, "I suffer from MND and was diagnosed over 6 years ago, knowing that at some stage I would reach a point when my muscles would have deteriorated to such an extent that I could not function effectively. Under UK law, it is perfectly legitimate to remove a ventilator from someone like me. This is not something I would have chosen, but I feel I have no alternative to ending my life without pain and suffering and without compromising others. However, my heart goes out to all those people who are terminally ill with cancers and other horrible diseases which make their lives execrable because they can't find any release from their terrible suffering." This man, a staunch campaigner for the right to die with dignity, was forced to carry on living a life he had deemed to be over until his body had deteriorated to such a degree that it was being kept alive by a machine. But why? Why was he unable to make a conscious, well-informed decision to end his life on his own terms? Well, the simple answer to that question is that he lived in the UK, and in spite of growing public opinion, UK law currently forbids this. According to the Suicide Act of 1961, Section 2, subsection 1, it is a criminal offence to encourage or assist someone to commit suicide or attempt suicide, no matter what the circumstances. The punishment for anybody found guilty of doing this? Up to 14 years in prison. However, it is just possible that all of this may be about to change. On the 29th of November 2024, members of the UK Parliament will debate and vote on the latest incarnation of the assisted dying bill put forward by Labour MP Kim Leadbeater. The entire bill has been published and is available online for anyone to read, but given that it's 40 pages long, here is a brief summary of the main points as outlined in an article in The Guardian. To quote them, "The person must make 2 separate declarations of their wishes, which must be signed and witnessed. They can change their mind at any time. 2 independent doctors must be satisfied the person is eligible and, if necessary, consult a specialist or expert in mental capacity. The application will then be heard by a High Court judge. The assisted death cannot take place for a further 14 days unless the person's death from illness is imminent. The life-ending medication must be self-administered by the patient. It cannot be administered by a doctor or anyone else." End quote. Although at first glance this might seem rather limiting, what would happen if somebody were incapable of administering the medication themselves, but was of sound mind and wanted to end their own life? Provisions have been included for this eventuality. The coordinating doctor may prepare the substance for self-administration by that person, prepare a medical device that will enable that person to self-administer the substance, and assist that person to ingest or otherwise self-administer the substance. So, broadly speaking, that's how the system would work. As far as these things go, the plan seemed fairly comprehensive. Of course, there are potential problems and concerns, but far fewer than in previous versions, such as one that was rejected in 2015. But just what are these potential problems and concerns? Well, let's start with the obvious one: the moral objections. There are those who fundamentally believe that no matter what the physical and mental suffering of the patient, assisted suicide is so morally reprehensible that it should not even be considered. Chief among these are the various faith groups. Bishops from England, Wales, and Scotland recently issued a joint statement which reads in part, quoting, "We are alarmed by the impact that legislation will have on the most vulnerable members of our society. The option to end life can quickly and subtly be experienced as a duty to die. Some may well feel their continued existence is a burden to others and implicitly or explicitly be pressured into assisted suicide. This includes people who are elderly, infirm, and living with disabilities. The protection of such people is the foundation of civilized society. It is at the heart of good government." The former Archbishop of Canterbury expressed similar views, telling the BBC that he believed it to be a slippery slope that could potentially lead to people with mental or physical disabilities choosing to end their lives because they feel that they are a burden on their families or society. Worse still, he warned of the possibility that some could be compelled to do so by others. But it is not just religious leaders who have expressed concerns. Many doctors are opposed to assisted dying on the grounds that they believe it contradicts the fundamental principles of being a doctor. Those who work in palliative care, minimizing the effects of symptoms caused by incurable diseases, seem to be particularly against the idea. According to a British Medical Association or BMA survey, 83% of palliative care doctors are opposed. That being said, it's perhaps worth mentioning that when a wider section of doctors working in different areas of medicine were consulted, 50% were in favor of a change in the law to allow assisted dying, 39% were against, and 11% abstained. Perhaps even more concerning, though, is the matter of cost. Palliative care is expensive. Worse still, from a financial perspective, is that the more effective this expensive care is, the longer it will continue to be expensive. Skeptics have suggested, and some of these skeptics are placed very high within the NHS, that should the law change go ahead, terminally ill patients will be subtly guided toward taking the cheaper way out. Furthermore, launching a scheme such as this one will undoubtedly cost a tremendous amount of money. Given that the palliative care sector is already notoriously underfunded, people such as Dr. Matthew Dorr, the Honorary Secretary of the Association for Palliative Medicine, and Dr. Amy Prophet, consultant in palliative medicine at Barts Health NHS Trust and former president of the Association of Palliative Medicine, have been extremely vocal about their concerns. They argue that the money needed to implement assisted dying will put further strain on funding for those who wish to live out their natural lives in as much comfort as possible. If there is anybody watching this who believes cost-cutting in such a manner to be a moral boundary that not even governments would cross, then, well, prepare to be disabused of this happy notion. Healthcare savings have been a major consideration for several countries that went on to allow assisted dying and euthanasia, perhaps most notably Canada during 2020. The cost estimate for Bill C-7, Medical Assistance in Dying report, estimates that $149 million could be saved in 2021 alone. Now, at the risk of sounding like we are trying to start a conspiracy theory, while the reasons for a privately funded bill being submitted may be perfectly honorable and above board, the reasons for it going through may not be. Another argument that has been tabled by health professionals suggests that although the current proposals would ensure, or at least attempt to ensure, that anybody facing this decision would be of sound mind, it is arguable whether anyone coming to terms with the fact that their life will soon end can be truly 100% of sound mind. While at first glance, this may seem pedantic, if you think about it for a while, it actually raises one or two interesting points. Firstly, one of the leading causes of suicide is extreme depression of one sort or another. Such depression often manifests itself as feelings of hopelessness and an inability to go on. Given that knowing you will shortly die, with or without assistance, certainly has the potential to cause similar feelings, how likely is it that any psychological assessment will correctly ascertain whether a patient is feeling this way as part of the natural conclusion to their time on this earth, or as a result of a temporary alteration in their brain chemistry brought about by depression? How likely is it that within the 2 weeks or so that the application for assisted suicide is predicted to take, the patient will be treated for depression just in case? Secondly, is this even relevant in the scheme of things? With regards to this question at least, we believe the answer is probably yes. Although some have argued that either way, in about 6 months the patient will die and the only difference is whether or not they will get to choose when and how, surely for that point to be valid, they must truly be making that decision themselves rather than being drawn to it by an undetected altered state of mind. Now, before we move on and take a look at the other side of the argument, we feel it's worth circling back to further examine one of the points raised by the former Archbishop of Canterbury. In spite of all the proposed checks and measures, the system is still potentially open to abuse by, say, money-grabbing relatives in a rush to get their hands on an inheritance. Let's consider the following hypothetical example. Great Aunt Betty has terminal cancer and has been advised that she very likely only has about 6 months to live. With extensive palliative care, it is just possible that she might survive 18 months to 2 years. However, her selfish great-nephew Terry is getting married in 10 months' time. Although he has only spoken to his great-aunt twice in the last 20 years, he knows he is the only surviving relative and will therefore inherit the farm, as it were. Is it entirely beyond the realm of possibility that through subtle and gentle persuasion, perhaps by accidentally leaving his newspaper open to an article about assisted dying when he visits, Terry might convince his kind-hearted old aunt to take the quick way out for his own convenience, even though she had been planning to stay around as long as possible? Now, obviously, this is a rather extreme hypothetical, but any of you who have caught a few episodes of The Casual Criminalist over the years, that's a podcast that I do, will be fully aware that far more diabolical things have happened. So, now is the time to approach this topic from another angle. What are the potential benefits of allowing assisted suicide? Are the mechanisms contained within the current bill stringent enough to prevent potential abuse? Does data collected from other countries where similar programs have been implemented lend weight to the previously mentioned concerns? Well, let's start with the obvious benefits. As anyone who has watched a friend or family member deteriorate while in the grip of something like lung cancer can verify, even with the very best sedation and pain medication available, the ends can be a long, drawn-out, agonizing process. One of the most frequently voiced points of view on this issue is both very simple and very difficult to argue against. You most assuredly would not allow your dog to suffer like that. So why, given the choice, would you allow your grandmother to? While this viewpoint is often countered by those who argue there is a huge difference between the life of a dog and the life of a human, that argument somewhat misses the point. Obviously, the life of your grandmother is exponentially more valuable to you than that of your dog. But conversely, should your desire for her to be able to end her unnecessary suffering in a dignified manner not increase by that same magnitude? Pretty much all of us, whether consciously or not, like to think of ourselves as the most enlightened, most sensible examples of the human race so far. But how can we maintain this image, even to ourselves, if we do not have the right to decide, within sensible parameters, when we have suffered enough? In fact, modern medical etiquette already sort of provides us with this option. It just works slightly differently. This is seen in the form of a DNR, a Do Not Resuscitate order. Although most people are under the impression that a DNR is something set up only by the elderly or those with terminal conditions, according to the NHS quote, a healthy person can choose to have a DNR order. While it's more common among individuals with serious or terminal illnesses, even those in good health might opt for a DNR due to personal beliefs, values, or other considerations regarding the quality of life and medical intervention at the end of life. Put simply, you can elect not to be resuscitated if you believe that your quality of life will be so affected that you would no longer wish to live. Some would, and indeed have argued, why is it that you could choose not to end up in a place of suffering, but not choose to leave one should you find yourself there? But what about the claims of the slippery slope? Are there any examples of countries that have introduced strict assisted dying laws only to substantially relax them further down the line? Well, as with almost anything to do with this topic, the answer's complicated. While it certainly is true that in countries such as Belgium and the Netherlands, the criteria for who is allowed to take their own life have changed since their inception, there is little to no evidence that suggests the system has been taken advantage of to a significant degree. While it is certainly true that the number of people taking advantage of these services has increased over the years, most people are of the opinion that this is down to the destigmatization of assisted dying rather than systemic abuse or rash decision-making. This opinion seems to be backed up when we take a look at places such as Oregon. The Death with Dignity Act has remained largely the same since it was put in place during 1997, and the increase in people choosing to end their lives seems to be proportional with that of countries where the criteria have been updated over the years. As for the concerns raised by doctors, no medical professional will be forced to participate, and the bill includes specific protections for anybody who chooses not to. Furthermore, should this actually be signed into law in the UK, instead of potentially receiving a 14-year prison sentence for assisting a friend or loved one to end their own life, something which, in fairness, we must point out very rarely happens, it will instead become an offence to pressure or coerce another person into declaring that they wish to end their life. Being found guilty of doing so would carry the same maximum prison sentence of 14 years. As for whether the assisted dying program will further deprive the branch of palliative care of much-needed funds, that of course remains to be seen. However, in our humble opinion, it needs to be made very clear that assisted dying is being offered as an alternative rather than a replacement. If, for example, the government were to commit to investing a significant chunk of money in palliative care services alongside assisted dying, this would probably go a long way in assuaging some of those concerns. Ultimately, though, no matter what your opinion, it will be down to the elected officials of the United Kingdom to make the final decision. Even if, on the 29th of November, a change in the law is voted for, this will only be the beginning of the process. In reality, it's unlikely that any real changes will be made for about 18 months. Although many people will feel that the delays caused by due process are positive and necessary to ensure that everything is done correctly, many more will begrudge the government every additional second. As we said at the beginning of this video, there is no definitive right or wrong answer here, and there are too many variables for most people to be 100% either way. Although there is, at last, hope for those who wish to end their lives with dignity and as little suffering as possible, many of those people will be forced to resign themselves to the fact that, for them, it will be too late.